world leaders have appealed for calm after days of violent clashes between Israel and the Palestinians. Rockets were fired towards Jerusalem by Palestinian militants. In response, Israel launched airstrikes into the Gaza Strip. Officials there say 20 people were killed.
There are very grave violations of international law occurring, that there is a disproportional use of force against Palestinians. All of the casualties, all of the deaths are Palestinian. It's not enough to say let's de-escalate, as if all of these Palestinian lives are not worth a pause at the very least, an expression of sincere regret and condolence. None of that is happening. And without consequence, let me just put it that way, without consequence for violations of international law, this trap will continue. This reality will not cease. And that's just untenable.
Well, let's talk to Hen Mazzig, an Israeli writer and former Israeli Defense Force humanitarian officer. Good to see you this morning. All these world leaders now calling for calm. Will any of that be heard on either side, do you think?
I think that the situation right now is very emotionally charged. We are, right after Jerusalem Day. Nakba Day is coming this Saturday. So people are using it as an excuse to promote violence, unfortunately. And I think that we will see more violence coming, and it's coming from all sides. So I think at this point, the most important thing to do is to de-escalate and to stop the violence. The violence started last week with the murder of Israeli teenager Yehuda Guetta that was murdered by Palestinian terrorists, and his both friends were shot. So responding to what we heard before, the Israeli civilians have been the ones that were going under rocket attacks and being shot. And yesterday we heard calls in Al-Aqsa Mosque to bomb Tel Aviv. So the situation is indeed very, very tense right now.
But I mean, it is always a very difficult situation when we talk about the tensions between Israel and the Palestinians. But certainly from our correspondent on the ground was saying some of the skirmishes over the last couple of days around the Al-Aqsa Mosque seem to have been unprovoked, and the police force, the IDF, seem to be taking the lead on provoking some of that violence.
I'm not sure if the IDF was the one provoking. I think that once, these are not protests like protests that we're seeing in London or in America. These are violent protests. Yesterday, a Jewish man was almost lynched driving his car in Jerusalem by a mob of Palestinian activists that were throwing blocks on him. As I said, just a week before, Yehuda Guetta, a teenage boy, Israeli boy, was killed. And the situation has just escalated since then. The protests themselves are not just protests of holding signs and chanting anything peaceful. It's violent protests using blocks, trying to harm civilians. And as we've seen overnight, my mom told me that rockets were barraged on Israel, over 200 rockets. And it's important that we look at those rockets for what they are. Each rocket is an attempt to murder Israelis. These are not just, imagine going into an audience in London somewhere with a gun and just shooting 200 times. The fact that we have the defense system like the Iron Dome that is protecting Israeli civilians doesn't mean that those rockets are not an attempt to murder. And Hamas also has a way to stop the violence in Gaza and stop the airstrikes of Israel. It's just called to stop shooting rockets. That's what they can do.
You talked in your first answer about the importance of de-escalation. That has to come from both sides. What can Israel do? What can the Israeli parliament do on the basis that, it does seem to be pretty unstable at the moment with the problems that Mr. Netanyahu is facing?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Stephen. I think the Israeli government has taken a few actions, a few steps yesterday. First of all, the Sheikh Jarah court decision that was supposed to come this week was postponed in 30 days to ease the tension. Jews were barred from going up to the Temple Mount yesterday morning, and I think today as well. Jerusalem Day Parade was rerouted, and instead of going through Damascus Gate in Jerusalem, it was rerouted to go through a different path to avoid tension. So Israel has taken steps to calm down the flames. But I think that what we're seeing is the other side, the Hamas in Gaza and the terrorists. I mean, it's not only in Gaza, also in Jerusalem. That the rockets were accepted with cheers, and that has to stop.
Okay, Hen Mazzig, it is good to talk to you. Thank you.